as well.
Thank you. Alhamdulillah. Thank you very much for having me.
Right now, I just want to start off by saying that, sometimes we don't realize it takes a single incident, a single event, a single experience that can actually change a person's life forever. And in your instance, from what I've just read, and the purpose, I mean, riding through Africa on your motorbike, and not in your wildest dreams did you ever expect, to be taken hostage, to be captured. But how did it actually impacted and change your life?
It's crazy. We all have these plans in our lives, and God obviously guides us. But it's amazing how actually we are not in control of our lives. And there is, there is Allah, there's God, and basically He has His plan. And no matter how much we try and live life the way we want to live it, there is a greater plan. And I certainly got to experience it firsthand. Like you say, this was a 6 year changing moment, and my life changed. I mean, it was 1/6 of my life, which basically I experienced up there with Al Qaeda in the desert, in the Sahara.
Yes. Now, let's just go back and, let's just go back to the time when obviously you were captured, and just to relive some of those moments or to share some of those experiences. And if you could just take us through briefly, Stephen, as to what it actually happened.
So I was living a dream of mine. I'm from Johannesburg, but I spent a lot of time on a farm down in the Eastern Free State, and it was there that I had this passion for the outdoors, and I always wished to ride a motorcycle through Africa. And I was living in London for a number of years, and in 2011 I got to experience my dream. I got to begin this dream of mine, and Kath, my wife, and I, we were heading back to South Africa, and we were coming home. It was incredibly exciting. We were coming home. I was changing careers and changing lives, and my wife decided to fly back, and I thought that I would ride a motorcycle back. And it was, I wasn't far into my journey actually, when everything changed and everything just spun out of control. It was in November 2011, 25th of November, when really things changed absolutely. But I was, like I say, I was living my dream at the time, riding a bike through Africa.
Yes. Now, obviously, when one looks at the experience, obviously, it must have been a harrowing experience, caught in the blue, in the middle of Africa, in the heart of the African jungles. And just in terms of, what was your reaction, when you were captured and you were taken?
Al Qaeda isn't really a word that we know of in South Africa all that much. And I mean, certainly in the past, when I was a youngster, Al Qaeda flew the planes into the Twin Towers, and that was obviously a huge event in Europe and in the US. But for us South Africans, it always was at a distance. So for me, I mean, it was absolutely harrowing. I had no idea what was taking place at the time. Al Qaeda was a name, it was a word, but it was always a very distant word. And really, it was. These guys walked into our complex where we were staying with their AK-47s, and what really struck home was during this whole operation, like this whole Amalia that they were doing, one of them turned to me and said to me, "Do you know Al Qaeda? We are Al Qaeda." And it was then that really my world came crashing down around me, and all these crazy thoughts started to rush through my mind, like, what on earth am I getting myself into? These guys are known for slitting throats and cutting off heads, and now I'm basically in their captivity. It's funny how your life flashes before you, and your brain just operates at such a pace, trying to make sense of the situation that you are now falling into. But really, and that was day one.
Exactly. And I suppose, it possibly, it must have come as a shock, but it's only after a period of time when reality actually starts to hit home. Because, at first, the first few days it's shock. And I've had, obviously, the opportunity of talking to a few other prisoners who have been kept up in places like Guantanamo Bay. And it's only after a little while that reality actually hits home. And that's when you decide that, I need to obviously make best of this worst situation that I find myself in, Stephen.
100%. I had a British passport from living in the UK for so long, and obviously the Brits are extremely hated by Al Qaeda. For everything that they for everything that they're doing in the Muslim lands. In in Afghanistan and in like the Arab Peninsula. So the Americans, the Brits, the French, the Israelis, there are a lot of northern hemisphere countries that are absolutely hated by Al Qaeda, and it did take months before I actually understood. I feared my life enormously in those early months. There were some incredibly difficult and stressful times when I didn't actually think I was going to survive it. And it probably took the better part of 9 months for me to try and actually believe that this wasn't a dream. It was just so far from my reality, so far from South Africa, so far from the UK. It was just the behavior, and it was absolutely everything. Even the language, I battled with the language, the food, the shelter. Everything was just so foreign. It took me months before I began to understand what I actually was in. And with respect to fear, you obviously I hit some very dark places where I was never quite sure if I was going to make it out of there. And I had a huge responsibility for my family. I was married, I had a wife, I had parents. I was going to get into my family business. I had a lot of responsibilities, and I realized at a particular point that if things didn't change, I was not going to survive this, and if I survived it physically, for example, if I wasn't executed, well, I certainly wasn't going to survive it mentally. And it was there that you start to realize that you actually have to pull yourself together. Otherwise, your life is going to change on a mental scale permanently. And you will probably, and I don't know if one can ever come back from a situation like that if you do hit rock bottom.
Well, I'm certain, that, a lot of these memories are still flashing through your mind. But the key issue here is in surviving, you've added value to your life. And I think this is important to understand, where even you taught yourself a number of the other languages, for instance, French, Arabic. And this, I think, is very, very important because, once you start adding a bit of value, you try to make the best out of a bad situation. A lot actually mentally or psychologically, it is a boost, and it actually, you live with hope all the time that someday this entire ordeal will be ending, Stephen.
For sure, no, for sure. I mean, I really was thrown in the deep end, and it was sink or swim. But I learned about 34 of the Quranic prayers off by heart. I learned it. Like in Arabic, obviously. A lot of the guys up in North Africa couldn't read or write. They were illiterate, and they didn't understand Arabic. Or actually Arabia Fusha. Okay, so they understood Arabia Hassaniya, which was the West African dialect. But a lot of them didn't actually understand. And it added for one, probably the most important thing there in the desert was I really got to learn about myself, and that I am far more capable than I give myself credit for. If Al Qaeda weren't going to kill me, I wanted to come out of the desert a better person, and it allowed me opportunity to learn how to live in other places, in other environments, how to just how competent and strong are we physically and mentally. It certainly opened a lot of doors for myself, and also it required that I really leaned on God. It really required. I had nobody else on my team there. There was nobody else, and it really brought me very close to God while I was there in the desert, which was
in emerging as a better person, Stephen. What were the issues that actually stood out or stand out for you in terms of what made you a better person?
It's funny. I did an interview a few days ago, and some people battled to understand when I actually came out and said that Al Qaeda had good character. There were some people who phoned in afterwards and actually said, how can this man say that Al Qaeda had good character? But if I could have put the fear of death and the fear of being killed and the fear of all of this aside, within the Quran, it states that character is absolutely imperative. Lying, like mutakibr, liars, this holds a very hot place in hell for you. And what I learned from Al Qaeda was, if I asked them a question and they did not want to give me the answer, they would not lie to me. They would just not give me the answer. They would just go quiet and say, we're not answering this, rather than lying, obviously, because this is haram. This is a big sin. And it taught me they would portray big character and good character. And I was absolutely saturating myself in this for a number of years, if you like. And it taught me a lot. It taught me a lot about sincerity and about not being flippant and about actually living for people and not living for money. Live for Jannah, don't live for dunya. And live in the present, and give thanks and be grateful. And it taught me these things. And I think it took me to a place, this was a place where I always was as a child, but as you grow up and you start to get into a career where you start to earn more money, you start to get too busy and distracted, and you start to lose a track on life, of what really is important in life. And it allowed me to refocus on what matters. And I must say, when I came out the desert at the other end, it took me quite a long time, up until now, being 3 years out the desert, I don't like to be focused on money. It doesn't give you value. It doesn't give you warmth. It doesn't give you a reason to wake up in the morning. Really, for everything is about purity and actually trying to help people. And that is probably one of the biggest things that I learned to grow as a person there in the desert, that we are all the same. We've all been created, by God, and we are all the same. We all get hungry. We all get thirsty, and we all want to actually, create a better life. So it's important that there's zakat. It's important about these things. And that probably was the biggest lesson that I learned. I learned I must be a better person. I must be a better person for other people and for myself.
Well, Stephen, we're going to go for a quick break. We need to pay a few bills. We'll be back with you.
All right.